Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute or two before we start. Give it another 30 seconds and then we'll kick it off. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be going over the results from the Giving USA report that came out a few weeks ago and just go over strategies regarding it. So my name is Adam Holzberg. I'm a partner here at Sachs in our audit practice for nonprofits. And I'm joined alongside with Lauren Frary, who's our Director of Strategic Business Transformation, handling all things non-financial for nonprofits. So our agenda today, as I mentioned, we're going to be going over the Giving USA reports that came out a few weeks ago, what the landscape is kind of like right now for nonprofits. Also going to touch on the new tax law and what impacts there could be to nonprofits. Just give a sense on where things may be heading or trending towards the future due to the tax law changes. And then we'll go over, with all that data, what to do with it. What's the strategies now that you know what the landscape is like, what the philanthropic landscape is currently about, where the contributions are, how the tax law could impact things, and now what do you do with all that data? So we'll go over those kind of strategies. All right, so we have several slides here. This is from Giving USA, straight from the report. So just going to lay the foundation. So 2024 contributions, giving was at 592.5 billion. So it was a pretty significant increase compared to 24. As you can see, individuals still make up the vast majority of giving. So while there's always a lot of tension, towards foundations, bequests, and others, individuals are still the largest source of giving in the sector. Now, with that said, within that number, so right now about 2/3 of all giving is from individuals, that the number of donors is declining. So we're seeing consolidation in that percentage. So smaller donors are declining. They're getting less and less small or micro donors, and it's consolidating more with the wealthy or mega donors. So the Lauren will go over it, but donor retention always vital, very important, especially as there's consolidation in that individual percentage. Also just want to point out, so in foundations, that does include family foundations, which is essentially a source of giving from individuals. So when you look at it that way, individual giving is even larger than what's really being shown here. But with that said, foundations still make up the second largest source of giving in the sector. And then I just want to touch on corporations. So corporations grew quite a lot in 24. I think it was the fastest growing source of giving. That was just being driven by corporate profits. So just something to keep in mind that corporations are a rising area of giving. But once I touch on the tax law changes, we'll see if there could be any impacts there. So this next slide is looking at where did all that giving go? What sectors in the nonprofit industry are receiving the dollars? So you can see religion is the largest source recipient of giving. It's been that way probably for more than the past 40 years. Um, but giving to religion has been declining. So in the past, number was probably more than 50%. Now it's roughly under a quarter. Um, the other areas that are a large source of receiving dollars is human services, education. There's gifts to grant making foundations, public society benefit, which is your civil and social advocacy groups, and health. Now, there's different trends when it comes towards giving by different generations that we'll talk about later, but this is the current landscape of giving. So this is going back to regarding the first slide with the different sources of giving and the overall change. So 23 to 24 in total saw an increase in giving after inflation. And that's just something important to know because this is the first time in the past 3 years that giving has outpaced inflation. So this is definitely a positive you know, development. Part of that does have to do with the fact that inflation has come down quite a bit over its peaks. But the past year saw a strong of giving based on GDP growth, stock market performance, all really drove giving in the past year. You can see individuals make up a large percentage of that increase at 5%. And then the other I mentioned earlier, one of the fastest growing sources was corporations. So you can see over the past 2 years in total, corporation giving has grown by almost 15%. So it's a very large, not large yet, but it's a very fast, quickly growing source of giving. Individuals grew by 3% in total over the past couple of years. Foundations were flat. I know there's a lot of attention to foundations and trying to receive grants from them. So that was flat over the past couple of years. And then bequests, which is a little more volatile, saw significant declines there, about 16%. So now just looking at the different changes in giving by the type of recipients. Um, Religion has been steadily declining over past 40 plus years. So this past couple of years, that's not different. This past year, it declined by 1%. In total, over the past 2 years, by about 4%. Education, public society benefit, international affairs all saw some of the largest changes, positive wise, as well as health. International affairs definitely being driven by current international events. It's definitely, a lot of items in the news, definitely driving sources of giving there. Same idea for public society benefit. There's a lot of tension in the news right now about different civil and social issues. So that's driving giving to those sources. But otherwise, education, health, and human services make up the largest other portion of giving outside religion, and they also have fairly decent increases. So this is the total giving over the past 40 years, which is a little scary to think about. In 1984 was 40 years ago. Um, so as you can see, the trend of the chart is upwards overall. So, there's been declines, been recessions. Even during recessions, usually giving is just flat. The one time it went down was during the great financial crisis, the great recession in 2009. Otherwise, giving overall has either stayed flat or gone up. The past couple of years saw some ups and downs. It got very shaky post-COVID. So you see some declines there, around 22 or so. 21 was a large peak. It's a top year of giving so far. We haven't, outdone that yet. But based on the trend of the chart, we will eventually. it's been upward. So just something to keep in mind that, despite any economic conditions, the path has shown us that overall, even in a bad economic landscape, usually giving just remains flat and it will quickly go back up again. So something to just keep in mind. So this is now looking at the giving by source, but going back, roughly 40 years. So each column is a 5-year average. So you can see individual giving at one point 40 years ago made up 80% of all giving. We're now down to 2/3 of all giving. Now, I would argue that portion of that has to do with the rise of family foundations. That number, as I mentioned, is in that foundation line item. So that's been a source of giving, especially for wealthy individuals. So you can see there's been a lot of growth there in foundation giving from 7 to 18%. Now, bequests and corporations have remained relatively flat, more or less. It's really the changes in individuals and foundations. But as a quick point, even though individuals have been declining, still 2/3 of all giving, so that should not be forgotten that they're still the largest source of giving. Um, so here we have same idea, but now the recipients of the giving. So you can see going back 40 years ago, religion received 56% of all giving. That number is now down to 25%. So you're looking at, more than half all giving 40 years ago, now down to about a quarter of giving. So it's been a significant decline in that area. Um, but then you look at human services, 40 years ago, roughly, was about 6%. Now it's at 15%. So, that they've been the ones who are kind of receiving the funds as religion has declined. And a part of that just has to do with, changing demographics, different generations. You know, I would imagine 40 years ago, people probably would assume that religion would just stay consistently, maybe 50% more. But, the generations change, people have different attitudes, different philosophies, and that impacts giving. So slightly stealing Lauren's thunder there about different generational giving, that she'll touch on, but something to keep in mind that, you know, you need to really take into account the changing, age groups, different demographics, and what their interests are, and how's that align with your mission. Sorry, stealing your thunder there.
No problem.
Um, so just a quick summary of the report. So total giving hit a new high of 592 roughly $1 billion. After inflation, it was a 3.3% increase. I mentioned this was the first time in the past few years that giving has surpassed inflation as an increase. Individuals drove the growth, so they make up, roughly 2/3 of total giving, largely driven by the stock market and GDP. Giving as a percentage of GDP is basically always flat throughout the past 40, 50 years. Roughly around 2% of GDP is giving. So, as a country's economic performance grows, um, nonprofits get more money, and for whatever reason, it just stays at that 2% number. Corporate giving has surged, rose by 9.1%, about roughly 44 billion. So this was the fastest source of giving. But the new tax law did have some changes. So next couple of slides, we'll just go over those changes, and that could impact giving by corporations. Religion, oh, too quick there. Religion still receives the most charitable giving, but growth was flat. After adjusting for inflation, religion declined by 1%. The big gains were in education, international affairs, public society benefit, the three main winners there. And then 4 sectors hit all-time highs. So education, health, arts, culture, humanities, and environment and animals um, all hit their all-time highs. So I mentioned this a few times. There was a new tax law that recently passed. It was signed into law on July 4th. So there was nothing truly directly impacting nonprofits themselves. They removed, thankfully, that provision that could have stripped the tax exempt status of nonprofits by the Treasury Department. So thankfully that was taken out. But there were some changes on the tax laws regarding how people can take deductions for charitable giving. So there is a new tax deduction for non-itemizers. So basically, this is called your above the line tax deduction. So this is what reduces your AGI or adjusted gross income. So basically now individuals will be able to deduct $1,000 of charitable giving, and married couples filing jointly can deduct up to 2,000 per year. So this is estimated to generate about 74 billion over 10 years from nonprofit organizations. So this is definitely a positive. Um, Giving to DAFs, donor advised funds, does not count for this deduction. The other changes, though, so itemized deduction changes. So those who are itemizing, there was a ceiling of 60% of AGI limit on charitable contributions that was temporary from the tax law change in 2018. That was made permanent now, so there's a permanent 60% limit. So basically, if you have there's a taxpayer with 100,000 AGI, they can only deduct 60,000 as their cap, even if they have more charitable giving. Um, the other change they had is now there was a ceiling, now there's a floor. So itemizers can only deduct charitable contributions that exceed 0.5% of their AGI. So basically what that means is, let's say they took their deductions for non-itemizers. Let's say they got there's a married filing jointly. They deducted 2,000. They have more charitable giving though. Let's say they have another $1,000. Their AGI is 100,000. That means of that remaining $1,000, only 500 is deductible because 0.5% of 100,000 is 500. So the first 500 of that 1,000, they can't get a deduction for. Um, the other change they did is the maximum charitable tax write-off. So the highest tax rate currently under the new tax laws now remains 37%, but they changed it so now the tax deduction is capped at 35%. So while a wealthy individual will be paying at the highest tax rate of 37%, their charitable deduction will just be capped at 35. They won't get the full 37%. So the estimates for these changes is between 41 and 61 billion decline in giving over the next 10 years based on these factors. And then some corporate changes. So there remained a ceiling again of 10%. There's no change to that for charitable giving for contributions, but now they have a floor. So basically, corporations can now only deduct contributions that exceed 1% of their taxable income. So basically, if they have taxable income of 100,000, the first $1,000, 1% of their taxable income is non-deductible. So they only have $1,000 in contributions. They can't take any deduction in that scenario. This is estimated to reduce charitable giving by about 45 billion over the next 10 years. So doing the math based on those three main changes, You have the good one where non-itemizers can take a deduction, but the other changes to itemized deductions, to the corporate changes, it's estimated that over the next 10 years, the decrease in giving of between 12 to 32 billion, just based on those estimates. Um, so not a positive change, but you look at the whole net effect. Um, it's not a significant. You're looking at the highest about $3 billion less per year over the next 10 years, but it's not doing anything to help the sector in the end. Um, some other changes, there's a new tax credit for scholarship donations, so that could impact schools and education nonprofits. Nonprofits will now face a 21% excise tax on any salary that exceeds 1 million for any employee. So previously it was the 5 highest paid employees over $1 million. Now there's no cap, not the 5 highest, it's anyone over 1 million, you'll have to pay a tax. And they also increased the endowment taxes for private colleges and universities, um, with rates now going up to as high as 8% for schools with endowments above 2 million per student. Um, that's definitely targeted towards Ivy Leagues and other type of universities that have been fighting with the current administration. So additional changes. So the CBO estimates, and I think they recently changed they put this down a little bit. But before it was about 16 million people could lose their health insurance due to the legislation. So as coverage declines, nonprofits that rely on Medicaid to serve different populations may be forced to reduce or eliminate the programs, in spite of the fact that services will likely increase. That there's going to be a higher demand for their services, but there's going to be less funding due to the unfortunate cuts in Medicaid. There are also changes to SNAP. So it's estimated that 22 million families will be losing all or some of their benefits. So this is going to put a greater strain on food banks, food pantries, all community-based nonprofits. They're going to see a rising demand um, from this, and at the same time, states now to absorb more of the SNAP costs. So that could also divert state funds from different services. So overall, while there's not necessarily any direct impacts, all the indirect impacts to nonprofits as a whole are not necessarily positive to the industry. Between the impacts of the tax law, where the estimated result is decline in giving, with the cuts to programs here with Medicaid and SNAP, um, you know, with the Giving USA report, very positive, giving's increase. But this tax law kind of puts a damper on those results based on everything going on as a whole. So with that said, setting the landscape there, hopefully not making it too depressing, I'm going to pass it off to Lauren, who's going to discuss the strategies to deal with these current issues and how to best manage your nonprofit through these times.
Thanks, Adam. So super happy to be here and always happy to work with Adam on providing the latest information to support our nonprofits. So I want to go back. Adam certainly mentioned the idea of DAFs, and just want to go back to this for a second because they are kind of increasing in terms of popularity for donors. And essentially, DAF is a charitable investment account where donors can contribute and receive an immediate tax deduction and then recommend grants to their chosen charities over time. So sounds great, right? You create a DAF and you get a tax deduction and money goes and is infused into the nonprofit sector. That was the original idea of the DAF. There are certainly some challenges, right? One, the popularity of DAFs, they are increasing, right? So that's, and Adam had mentioned that, right? In terms of individual giving and individual giving opportunities, you can be your own philanthropist by having a DAF. The the concern is that the sponsors of DAF, so that's your like Fidelity, right? Are doing away with minimum requirements to make it even more accessible. So there was initially a requirement that you had to give a particular amount of money to have a DAF, and they're doing away with that. So more people have access to DAFs, more donors have access to creating DAFs. But the problem is, unlike foundations, there's no minimum payout required. So what is actually happening is billions of dollars are sitting in these DAFs and they're not getting infused into the nonprofit sector, which was the original intent. And so there is some kind of advocacy afoot to try to address that. So next slide, please. So the Philanthropy Project has been looking into this and creating some thoughts, think tanks, advocacy around how do we move some of this DAF money back into the nonprofit sector as opposed to having it sitting around. And so some of their solutions include, adjusting the timing of the tax deduction to better match when the funds are available for active use, right? So you can put your money in, but until it starts to go into the nonprofit sector, you don't get to receive that tax benefit. Changing the private foundation to DAF transfer rule in connection with the 5% payout requirement, right? As you know, or as you may know, foundations are required to pay out 5%. We believe that there should be a similar payout requirement for DAFs. There are some loopholes in what a qualified distribution was, so trying to tighten that up a little bit. And then really, again, about transparency, making sure that people understand the use of the funds and how it all works for the nonprofit sector. One other bullet that's not actually up there is I would recommend to any nonprofit that is the recipient of a DAF that if you can find the donor, oftentimes these donations are made anonymously and you can't find the donor. But if you happen to know who the donor is, you may want to contact them and ask if they would be willing to make the donation a automatic annual contribution. That way, you're kind of guaranteed some funding every year, and the DAF is used in the way that it was originally intended. Okay, so generational giving. This is one of my favorite topics, right? So we've got technically 4, maybe 5 generations out there. And I think that this data is really important in your fundraising strategy. So if we look at the 4 generations that are outlined here, you can see that for all of the generations out there, over 50% give. Over 50% of every generation gives. And in fact, the traditionals are giving at a very, very high rate. They have amassed a lot of wealth and they have money to give. I think the other interesting statistic is the third one down, the number of charities that each generation is giving to. So as you can see, each generation is also giving to multiple charities. Why is this important? Well, if you're a nonprofit, what you want to do is you want to look at your donors and you want to make sure that you are their top charity. You want to be their #1 charity. And I'll talk about strategies to do that, right? But if you have a baby boomer that's giving to 4 charities, how do you make sure that you are the top charity so that if they change their giving pattern, you're still in the mix? And then likely to support, I think that it's worthwhile to do a little additional research and find out exactly the other types of giving that each generation gives to so that you can strategize and kind of customize some of your campaigns to meet their philanthropic goals and priorities. So how do you engage donors of all generations? Certainly, you do want to engage donors of all generations. You don't want to concentrate on just one generation. But you want to make sure that when you tell your stories, it touches on things that each generation would appreciate, right? And storytelling is definitely emerging as a fundraising strategy. So, and there are actually storytelling professionals out there that support your fundraising strategies. So again, just make sure your stories are really touching each generation. Understand understand the values held by each generation. So again, that you can customize your asks and your campaigns to each generation. And certainly tailor those campaign messages. So you could have one fundraising campaign, one appeal that you customize, you write differently for each generation, and then segment your donor database by that generation, and then send out that customized message to enhance your chances of getting funding. Really important, building ties with donor families, children, and networks. So you may have a donor or a couple that donates to you very regularly. How are you now bringing in the other generations of that family? Some kind of really easy things to do is, and things that I've seen that have worked is making sure that when you have a donor appreciation event, that the donor's family and children are invited. Again, you want to start to engage the rest of the family and the children in your organization and turn them into future donors. I've also seen really creative nonprofit had a bring your child to a board meeting day. Not a heavy board meeting, but children were invited to come to see, what goes on behind that closed door, and what does the nonprofit talk about, and what are their challenges and their successes. That is a really great way to really start to engage the next generation of donors. And even the idea of creating a junior board with donor families, friends, is a really great way to start to engage that next generation. And then offer events that actually appeal to young people. I think when I think about like golf outings and galas, I do think of the older generations. And again, you want to start to engage young people in events and fundraising opportunities that appeal specifically to them. So, couple trends to watch. We pulled out 6 trends to watch, and I'm going to actually go through each one and some strategies for each one. But the trends that we're watching this year are, and this is going to show up year after year, is diversifying your fundraising strategy. So Adam and I talk about this all the time. Using AI correctly for personalized fundraising, correctly and responsibly. So we'll talk a little bit about AI and how that's coming into play. Appealing to individual donors, always at the top of your list, because we know from Adam's talk that individual donors still make up the largest piece of contributors. Focusing on donor retention versus recruitment. What are some strategies to really retain the donors that you have? Recurring gift programs, like what I was talking about regarding the DAFs and having an annual recurring gift through the DAF. The value of these is starting to really come to light because it does provide kind of a reliable source of some income. So we'll talk about that. And then the impact-driven giving, right? Showing your donors the tangible results of their contribution and how you can keep data to keep those donors engaged. So I'll have a couple tips for each one of these. So diversifying your fundraising strategy or your fundraising plan. Every time I get a call from someone asking me if I can help them fundraise, my first question is, do you have a fundraising plan? Do you have a fundraising strategy inside your strategic plan? You've got to have some kind of annual plan to really guide your fundraising path through the year. So what should be in that plan? Well, the first thing you want is really concrete fundraising goals. And it's not just a goal about how much money each event or each campaign is going to raise. Certainly that's important. But you also want to have goals in terms of the number of people that you need to attend your event, or the number of people that you are going to reach through your campaign, or the number of new potential donors you're going to reach out to. So make sure you have concrete goals. Um, Certainly events is part of a strategy or a plan, and making sure that you are segmenting your donor database for each event. You don't want to send everyone on your database every invitation, because then you're going to potentially have to deal with donor burnout. Um, Choose appropriate fundraising channels for your organization, right? So beyond events, you also want to think about major gifts, online fundraising, annual appeals, capital campaigns, right? Think about your strategy. You've got to have multiple sources of revenue. Which are the channels that make the most sense for your particular organization and your mission? Again, retention and recruitment strategies. I always say that if you have $1 and you have to choose between spending that dollar on retention and recruitment, your best bet right now in this climate is to spend that dollar on retention. And I'll talk about retention a little bit later. It's not to say that you're not recruiting, but you really want to focus on retention right now. Researching strategic partners, right? The nonprofit sector is obviously competitive. We have a lot of new nonprofits springing up. And I think it is very strategic to find those nonprofits that have similar or like missions that you can partner and collaborate with for a number of reasons. One, I am finding increasingly foundations are looking to give to organizations that are working in collaboration with other organizations so that the impact is amplified. So find those strategic partners. The other reason is there might be ways that you can reduce your cost or increase your efficiencies by sharing some of your resources. So try to find some strategic partners. And then again, cultivation and stewardship programs and events. Really, really important that you are cultivating your donors and stewarding every single dollar. And often you can have donor recognition events, right? Or stewardship programs to, again, support those activities and keep your donors engaged. So using AI for personalized fundraising. So a lot of people are maybe wary of AI or unsure of the value. I think the first place you should start is one, have a responsible use of AI policy. That way you understand the best way to use it in a way that doesn't create some kind of conflict of interest. The other thing I might suggest is get an AI training so that you understand the best way to utilize AI to your advantage for efficiencies, cost savings, and other activities. Here are some ways you can use AI for donors. You can use AI to kind of take your donor database and segment your donor database and create groups of donors that have similar characteristics. And then you can create a campaign just for those donors and speak to those characteristics of giving. Using predictive AI to determine which donors would be most likely to give a major gift, right? So if you're going to do a major gift campaign or a capital campaign, you really want to spend your time with the people that have the ability and the propensity to give a major gift. AI can help you sort that out. AI can generate personalized emails or social email posts that really speak to your mission, but more importantly, speak to your donor base. And certainly AI can automate data entry, report generation, again, just to free up some of your fundraising staff's time. The other way that I use AI is in grant writing, and this gets tricky, right? In grant writing, obviously you want to create the content and then have AI tweak it for you, right? The other way that AI comes in very, very handy is if you are writing a grant that requires measurable outcomes, right? Your SMART goals or something that you can measure, you can write an outcome and then ask AI to make sure that it's actually measurable. That's a really great use of AI to make sure that your outcomes are in fact measurable. So many great uses of AI, but again, make sure you have a responsible use of AI policy and you get some training on the appropriate use of AI in fundraising. Okay, appealing to our individual donors. You know, it seems simple, but this takes a lot of time and dedication. So really what you're trying to do is just build genuine relationships. And the other thing is you want to make sure that you're actually meeting their philanthropic goals, right? So a lot of time we spend time with our donors and we talk about our needs, our mission, our programs, the value of our work in the community. But don't forget the other side of the conversation. And that side of the conversation is, well, what are your philanthropic goals? What is the legacy that you want to leave? Do you want a naming opportunity, right? Do you want to be named in our annual report, right? So make sure you understand what their interests are and their philanthropic goals are so that you are meeting them where they're at. Obviously, demonstrate the impact of their contribution. How do you do that? Well, you can send pictures. If at all possible, have them come to your programs and see what their contribution has done for the programs and the people that benefit from your services. And please, please, please make the donation process easy and meaningful. One way to do that is on your website, make sure that you have one page that has every piece of information that a donor would need, right? So your EIN number, the mailing address if you're going to mail a check, because people do still mail checks, the website, the donate now button, have it all on one page. So a donor, it's very easy for them to make that donation. So back to donor retention. Again, this is about relationship building, right? Retaining your current donors, because those are also the donors that you want to start to have a multi-generational giving trend within a particular family. So build those strong relationships. Again, make sure that you're communicating the impact of their contribution. We know through research that the number one reason someone doesn't give a second donation is because of lack of communication from the recipient organization. So make sure that you get a donation that there is a lot of communication about not only acknowledging, right, but this is what your dollar did. Create some personalized communications, you know, make sure you understand what holidays are important to them, or when their birthday is, and involve your board members, right? Have your board members send or sign off on the acknowledgements, or the communications. Provide regular updates on how the donations are used. This is so key. So you get a contribution, you say thank you, you send a picture. Make sure in a couple months you also give an update on the program or the contribution and the value of that contribution. Ask your donors to attend or speak at your events. That's a very compelling speaker, when someone can say, I believe so much in this mission that I've made a significant contribution. And then again, celebrate your donors through donor recognition and acknowledgement events. They do not need to be fancy. A easy reception, a tea. I think donors just like to be appreciated, but they don't want you to spend a whole lot of money on them. Okay. Recurring gift programs. So I think that again, like asking a DAF donor to make an annual contribution, recurring gift programs are a really great way to again kind of have some reliable sources of revenue through fundraising. One of the things that you should have always is a very compelling case for support. What's a case for support? A case for support is a one-page document that talks about your organization, the problem that you're trying to solve, and the data behind that. Like, why is this problem? What is the origin of this problem, right? How you go about solving that problem and some data to back that up. Really, the case for support should answer the question, well, why should I care or why should I give to your organization? So you should always have a compelling case for support for your organization. You also want to give multiple giving options, right? You can give monthly, quarterly, annually, but give options. Make the program easily accessible. And again, that goes back to generational giving, right? It may be that the baby boomers want a quarterly postcard reminding them of their quarterly pledge, right? Whereas other generations might want a text or an email reminding them that they pledged a monthly gift, right? But make it easily accessible. Emphasize the benefit of a recurring gift. What's the benefit of a recurring gift? Well, the primary benefit is sustainability, right? We want our nonprofit sector to be sustainable because they are the people and the places and the programs that keep our communities sustainable. So make sure people understand that a recurring gift means sustainability. And outline the long-term impact of recurring gifts. It could also be capacity building and helping the organization grow into the future. And then impact-driven giving. So impact-driven giving is becoming popular in that donors actually want to understand the data behind the work that you're doing, right? So one, they want to understand the causes of the problem. What is causing you to exist? Why does your nonprofit exist? And this kind of goes back to the cases for support. That information would be in your case for support, right? And then provide information that is data-driven, that measures the outcomes and tangible results of your donation. I always say, it's easy to talk about the number of people you served or the number of pounds of food that you donated, right? That's definitely a tangible result, and that's certainly data, right? I think you also want to think about not only the primary beneficiaries of your program and your services, but who are the secondary and the tertiary beneficiaries of your program? And how does that relate back to the taxpayer, right? So how does your programs, how do your results impact the tax base? It could be that your program provides a very relevant example, food for families who are experiencing food insecurity and reducing their reliance on things like SNAP, because we know SNAP is being reduced, right? That's a really important point for people to understand the impact of your giving, okay? Again, use collaborations and partnerships with other organizations or agencies that really amplify the impact of your work. I think collaborations are going to be very key moving forward when we're talking about fundraising strategy. And again, use data and evidence to track progress towards your mission. I understand that there's a couple of organizations popping up that all they do is help nonprofits kind of create databases and dashboards to track their progress. I think data is going to become increasingly important to track your impact and to be transparent with your donors. And then one final trend that wasn't on the first, the kind of the blocks of trends, but something to think about. Cryptocurrency is becoming a very popular way to give. And as you can see, donations to nonprofits exceeded 1 billion in 2024. I was actually shocked by this statistic. And the average donation was over $10,000. So we're talking about, again, back to our generations, our younger generations are really involved in this type of giving. And I think that it's something to not only be aware of, but potentially get ahead of. So go ahead to the next slide. So here are some ways to kind of prepare for and be ready for a cryptocurrency donation. One, create a crypto donation policy. Even if you don't currently receive crypto, and you don't think you're going to, it is really important to have this policy in place before you receive that donation, because then once you get that donation, people are going to be scrambling on how to manage it. So a simple crypto donation policy would outline how you will accept it, how it's going to be managed, how it's reported, and how the organization is going to maintain compliance with the IRS and transparency to donors. The other thing you want to think about is if the crypto will be converted immediately, right? Are you going to try to manage the crypto, or are you going to just convert it and use it as cash? There are some IRS requirements. It's important to understand those requirements when you receive a crypto gift. And obviously you want to acknowledge your donors as you would with any other gift. And then finally, make sure that you're implementing appropriate security measures to protect your organization and your cryptocurrency wallets and transactions. So try to get ahead of a crypto donation and start to think about having that policy in place for your organization. And that is some practical tips for your fundraising strategy. Okay, so do you want me to go into the questions?
Sure.
So we have one question. Can you share an example of a responsible use of AI policy? I, in fact, do have I have a sample policy. If you see my email up on the screen, if you shoot me an email, Pamela, I would be happy to send that over to you. Let's see.
Okay.
I don't see any other questions. Will this, oh, Lisa, hi, Lisa Marie. Will the slides be shared with us?
I believe they will be.
Yeah,
The shares will, the slides will go out to
yeah,
everyone.
to the registration list.
And this is being recorded as well, so this will also be out there.
Yeah, perfect. Let's see. Let's see.
Questions are coming in fast.
Okay. Um, do you have an example of a cryptocurrency acceptance policy? I personally do not. Adam, do you have anything?
I don't, but I guess my suggestion would be maybe start with like an investment policy statement
Yeah.
and then from there tailor it to crypto specifically. But that's probably your best starting point. I mean, crypto's still very new,
Yeah.
especially in the nonprofit sector and receiving it. So I don't know how many actually even created one.
Yeah. I think the other approach you can take is you should have a gift acceptance policy. And this can certainly be a section in your gift acceptance policy, because your gift acceptance policy will outline what you will and will not accept, but also how you go about managing some of your gifts. So either your investment policy statement or your gift acceptance policy, it could be part of. Next question. Okay, what are some of the recommended CRM softwares to help manage donor contact? So there are a lot of donor databases out there, and I think what's important for your individual organization is really to understand the functionality of each platform and how it fits in with um, your donor database needs. So some of the more kind of well-known, Donor Perfect, Razor's Edge, Blackbaud. But what is also coming up is a lot of smaller donor databases that have basic functionality that work just fine for a smaller nonprofit. Ariva being one of them. And I understand that there's an organization called Monday.com that for some nonprofits, smaller nonprofits, they have some free and reduced price donor database options. So there's a lot out there. You really need to research what they offer and how that fits in with your fundraising needs. Where would we find AI training? Maybe that'll be our next webinar, Adam.
AI training.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really. So each program out there probably has their training to use their program.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely going to be in general trainings on AI, but
Yeah.
maybe specifically looking at the softwares you're interested in and see like the demos they have is probably the best course of action.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to say to the person who's asking this question, if you would reach out to me separately, I might have a thought about your particular organization and AI. So just reach out to me and I'll talk to you later. Let's see. Okay, here's a good question. Should we be offering DAF donation information on our website giving page? Any recommendations that we can embed without the use of a third-party application to do this? Great question. You know, I think that what's important is to make sure that your donors understand that you accept DAF donations, right? And encourage donors to reach out to you personally about their DAF so that you can, again, make that request or suggestion that it's a recurring annual gift. But just making sure that donors know that you understand about DAFs and that you're willing to accept them.
I think anything you can do to make it easier for a donor to contribute to you, especially with a DAV, making it very out there that you are accepting DAVs, put in their mind that they have a DAV to think of you. That's definitely the best course of action. And then, it's not me going ahead of the game, but also if you want to go down this path, that you accept crypto, put it on there so they'll trigger something in their mind. Oh, I could donate through crypto.
Yep.
That could also garner some interest. But whatever you can do to make it easier for the donor is definitely the best course of action.
Yeah. Agree.
Okay. I
Question.
think that's all the questions right now. Well, thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah.
There is another webinar next week, Wednesday, the date, July 30th at 2 p.m. on investment policy statements. So if you're interested in that, you could go to the SACS website. Emails have also been sent out, and you can register for that webinar. If there's any other questions that anyone has, you have my email, Lauren's email right here. Reach out to us at any time. Always happy to help with any matters for your organization. And with that, that is our webinar. Right.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.